Hey, welcome to the Wellbeing Show. I'm your host, Noel. I've got a returnee guest because he's that good. This week's episode is the truth. And Richmond Stace, who's a pain specialist physiotherapist. Sort of, I've worked with him as well. So we have a working as well as a personal relationship. I brought him back on because he's going to be talking later on about a new book that he's written, which has condensed some of the many years of experience. And Richmond's quite a pioneer in the field of managing chronic pain. So he's condensed that knowledge and experience into a very practical help book manual that will help people, and particularly of relevance, and we'll discuss this more, particularly of relevance in these days, in post-COVID, long COVID, chronic fatigue days, that sort of does involve pain. And the sort of emotional pain, physical pain of the psychological sequelae that come with it, the depression, the trauma, stuff like that. All these things are really important in terms of the management of chronic pain. And so without further ado, I'm going to welcome you. Hi, how you doing?
Hi. Yeah, no, good to see you again.
Yeah.
Thanks for asking me back. Always love chatting with you.
Well, I just think it's really important to try and sort of highlight really useful contributions to this field because, because to put it very simply, if you want to see how bad it could get, go and take a look at the US and its opioid crisis.
Yeah.
That's where we could be, right? And there are some indications we're beginning to go in that direction because we're not managing the prescription of pain relief medication properly. We're not offering people enough alternatives. We do have pain clinics in the UK, I should say, and we do have very careful restrictions on the use of certain types of painkillers. But we're beginning to see some of the early indications of possible opioid misuse and misprescribing. So I think it is important in that context. I don't know what you think about what I've just got off the soapbox. So you can get if you like.
Yeah, no, I mean, spot on. I mean, there's been a fair amount of coverage on the opioid crisis, but particularly in the US, and there's been dramas on some of these well-known channels, let's say, for people to get an understanding. But the predominant model is still the biomedical model, and whilst that is great for acute and emergency, that sort of thing, we're very good at that. It's not the right model for anything that's persistent or chronic or pertains really to sort of what I often call, I mean, I'm not demeaning it at all, but lifeitis. These hugely inflammatory based responses to the way that we live. And I'm not finger pointing or blaming people. My start point is always that the person is doing the best with what they have, the resources they have, what they've learned, what they've been conditioned to think. And we've been largely brought up in a society that subscribes to the biomedical model, which put simply is the search for some kind of pathology or injury or observable, measurable cause of the symptoms. But there's a fundamental issue with that. You can't see pain, and you can't see it on a scan. There's no test that reveals pain. You rely on the person telling you. And so I've always been of the opinion that you believe, how radical is that? You believe what someone's telling you. Because that self-report and the story around that is key. But that can often be dismissed because findings may not reveal something that sort of matches up with it. But they're two different things. One's objective, one is subjective. And unless you've got a model that can look at both of those together and explain it, then fundamentally it's going to fall apart. And that's really what the biomedical model cannot do. It cannot explain those two things together. So people fall in the cracks. And we're talking huge numbers.
Yeah. Well, I mean, without doubt, we are talking huge numbers. In terms of, would you give a word to the model you are working with? You don't have to. So if it's not the biomedical, it's what?
Well, I suppose the word that's going to be most familiar, probably not to everyone, is the biopsychosocial. But there are flaws with that. There's issues because there's still a tendency for people, because we're all human, to default to the one that we're more sort of comfortable with. The model that I work with really is predictive processing, which is a way of understanding how our body systems are generating experiences, not just pain, but all sorts of experiences. And there's a huge amount of work on that in a range of fields, and it's growing interest, particularly in pain. I think is delivering, and it's a way of helping people to understand their experiences, but also highlighting ways forward, because it enables us to give meaning. And so many people come along and they're explaining or telling you about their pain, and that's their experience, but they don't know why it keeps happening. Surely I should be better now. And so PP is one way of helping. Now, I'm not saying it's fully proven. There's a lot of work to be done. There are other models and ideas, and I'm open to all of those. And I guess I'm blessed with the kind of embodied mind. I like to always be looking out for how we can shape and mold and move forward. So we can't just sit on what we've got. We have to keep going, and that will be, indefinite, I would say.
And so predictive processing is?
So essentially what it's saying is that all of the experience we have are best guesses. It's a lot of the stuff is around the brain, so the brain making these predictions, and these predictions are what we experience. So best guess is about the causes of the sensory information coming in. So if you think the brain is in here, it's encased in the skull, it has no access to the body or the world. It just receives sensory signals, sensory information. It's got to infer, it's got to guess what that could mean, make sense of it based on what's already been known. So prior experiences are really, can be really influential, particularly if they've been really notable ones. So if I keep having a particular pain in a certain situation over and over and over and over and over, then when I'm in that situation again in the future, my systems are going to kind of weigh things up. Well, what's the best explanation? Well, every time we've been doing this, pain has been the experience. That's the most likely explanation now, until we update the model. And so that's what we're doing with our work, is helping people to understand their experiences and reframe it, bring them up to date, so to speak, with what we know, give a sense of meaning, but then also start to shape new experiences by doing different things. I mean, you could call it, a lot of the work, graded exposure, perhaps, and terms that you'll be familiar with, because there's huge crossover here. Working within the window of tolerance, aiming to have good and better experiences to build upon. Because if I have a better experience of going to a cafe with a friend, there might be pain, but it was in my window of tolerance, and I managed the various parameters. So I got there in this way. I did it for that long. Then I went back, made sure I had recharge time, recovery time. That was a good experience. So next time when I go to do it, that was the prior. So that's shaping it in a different way too. Well, I went along, it was a nightmare getting there. It was very painful. And then I couldn't sit for very long, so I had to leave early. That will shape the next experience. So we're always trying to shape better experiences in practical things. And so, the bulk of the work is really about helping people in their way of living. And sort of wheeling back a little bit to the biomedical model and the traditional ways, the big deal in terms of treatment or therapy, whatever you want to call it, is typically around medication and exercise. Now, both can have a role, but they're not the big deal. And when I say that to people, they're like, well, what do you mean? How can that not be the big deal? Well, it's simply because of this. To take a pill, it takes a moment. And yes, it might give some relief, great, but there's nothing sustained in terms of transformation of that person's experience from that. There's no learning. How do I live better? How do I build on the skills of being well? How do I deal with my sleep? How do I reconnect with the things that matter to me so I get into better states, healthier states? How do I have a sense of purpose in my life again? Pills don't teach you that, because these are skills to learn and to practice. And with exercise, even someone diligently doing some exercises, some kind of movements and things, which are really important, but they will take a matter of a few minutes. And most people who are experiencing chronic pain, persistent pain, they're up for a lot of hours a day. So how is it a few exercises here and there are going to change their whole life? The big bulk of their time is them living the things that they want to do, have to do, need to do. How do we do those? How do you do those better over time? That's the bulk of the work, and those other things are around that, depending on the individual.
So let me just make a few connections and points, if that's okay, and then you shoot me down flames if necessary. So some things we're not saying is that the pain is in your mind. It's all made up. The pain is real. It's actually real, but the explanations we have as to why the pain exists and how to manage the pain are faulty. And they're faulty
absolutely.
in terms of our own personal experience, but also faulty in terms of the actual models that exist in terms of treatment models. They're faulty in that sense. They're limited. Those treatment models are limited. And also the internal working models that we have to explain our pain to ourselves are faulty. And we need new ways of understanding it and new behaviors in the world to help us manage this pain more effectively. And that the evidence, and I think the evidence is there, that we can tolerate far more distress than we think we can, and that our lives can become much more comfortable and much more productive when we learn that distress tolerance. Would that be a reasonable summary so far?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I'd sort of take it a little further, perhaps, beyond management, to say, look, we're trying to improve people's lives. That's the aim. And I genuinely believe that whatever the start point, whatever the circumstance, there are things that any individual can make better in how they're doing things, how they're thinking, what they're doing, because they're all it's all skills based, you know. And when you understand that you're generating your own experiences, and again, this isn't finger pointing or blaming if it's, you know, if things don't work out in the way you want in that particular moment. You know, it's all about learning. It's all about learning. And I'm, you know, it's great you pointed out that kind of that internal model and that sort of belief system. You know, people's beliefs about their pain play a big role in shaping that experience and what they do about it and what they think they can do about it. So if the person is really hinging, and many do until they understand, hinging their pain being on some sort of structure, you know, a disc or a joint or a muscle, and then I just simply say, hey, you know, those body tissues do not have the ability to generate pain. So yes, it's always real. So you say back pain, you feel pain and you feel it in your back, but it's not being generated there. And they're like, oh, what do you mean? What do you mean? Well, your body systems are generating that experience of your back pain, but those tissues there, the muscles, the nerves, the joints, the tendons, the ligaments, they do not have the ability of generating a conscious experience. You know, there's a lot, and this is where you know, I've spent many years now following and getting to know people working in that field, you know, consciousness studies, because it's so relevant. You know, how is it that this and all of our systems together, and me as an individual with my unique story and body systems, how is it I'm generating these experiences? I mean, it's wow. I mean, it's amazing that we do. Why do we even have an experience? You know, these are the massive questions that are being looked at. I mean, I find it fascinating, a bit geeky, I suppose, but it's very relevant to helping people to understand that, you know, and to reframe pain in as much as, yes, it's horrible. I mean, it can be the most challenging thing someone faces. It's deeply unpleasant and huge amounts of suffering, etc., etc. But it's one of many, many experiences we have. And the more we focus on it, the worse it gets. So in other words, that simple insight, focus on what you want rather than what you don't want. And my encouragement to people is, well, what do you want in your life? How do you want to live? What sorts of things do you want to be doing? Let's focus on that. And then we'll work on some skills to deal with the tricky bits, because there are tricky bits. Life is full of suffering. You can't avoid it. And you will have painful times. You will have flare-ups and things. I mean, hopefully not too often, etc., etc. But so let's prepare you for that. So you've got skills to deal with it.
So my understanding what you're saying is that chronic pain, the way it operates, it comes to dominate an individual and their life, and they become the chronic pain. And what you're offering is, no, we'll have a life. You'll have the chronic pain, but that will be managed. That's my term, not your term. That will lessen. The perception of it will lessen because you're getting into a life that is rewarding and happy and hopeful and fulfilling, gives meaning and purpose. And then there will be stuff that you technically have to do around trying to reduce the actual physical issue, if there's a physical issue, or there may not be anything much you can do if it's something like chronic fatigue syndrome, for example, which is, that just takes a bit of time. There's a lot of time involved in healing from CFS if you can fully heal from it. And during that time, the question would be, do you want to be the chronic pain or do you want to be something else? I guess I would put it in those quite simple terms. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. We don't need to, we do, but we don't need to be so loyal to the suffering, to the labels. We don't need to be loyal at all or attach. People do it, they attach them. They become defined by it sometimes, because that's their way of dealing with it. That's their way of coping. And that they have a choice. You can, if I work with someone, you have a choice. You can continue the way that you're doing things, or we can look at things in a different way, using some really relevant and practical science and philosophy underpinning very, the things that we can do together to shape something different, better. Let's get you on a path so that you have a practice each day that you follow. You have habits that are building on things like wellness. I think traditionally the thinking is often, well, when I get better, when I'm a bit better, then I'll start living. And I say, no. Well, this is your option. I say, no. Why don't you live now to get better? So that's the whole kind of turning the thinking on its head. And I guess that came to me largely through helping people get back to work, because there's a predominant thinking around this, that, well, when I'm better or 80% better or whatever it is, then I'll go back to work. And I say, well, that's all in the future. That's a fantasy because it doesn't exist. It's just a thought. How about going back to work to get better? Well, it sounds really radical. But it isn't, because this is the only moment. So what are you waiting for? I wouldn't always say it quite so. I don't know. It might sound blunt to some people. I don't know. I guess I'm shortcutting, very in-depth conversations that I might have.
Excuse me.
That's all right.
So sort of frog in my throat. Hopefully that will go. It'll go in a moment. Oh, how strange. My throat goes. Oh, excuse me, folks. There you go. It's beginning to clear up. I guess I'm understanding it from the sort of psychological side. And again, I want to make a point with people that it's like your mind is not out there somewhere. Your mind is part of you. It's your body. There's no practical distinction that can be made. And so I know as a fact that people have anxiety. I also know as a fact that people can live in their anxiety and their life can be awful, or they can make other choices and live alongside their anxiety and their life can be fine. We've known that for a very long time. And that's not about blaming people. That's just about giving people a set of skills, so as to be able to get on with life. And certainly from my perspective, getting on with life is the aim of any sort of treatment regime. I've never really understood treatment regimes, whatever they're for, that are about treating an illness. If that does that sound weird?
No, well, no, I'm sure we've chatted about this before, and I have questions about the idea of treating pain, because what are you actually treating, and certainly fixing? There's a lot of ideas out there. People need to be fixed. I don't subscribe to that idea at all. I don't think anyone needs to be fixed. Guidance, encouragement, shining the light on a path, walking with them, these kinds of ideas I think are much better, because people are making their own choices anyway. There's
too much judgment that goes on in that model, I think, and certainly from the psychology side of things, there's been far too many judgments and assessments of how people are, and turning that into an illness. And it used to be that if you were gay, you were ill. I mean, seriously, who would seriously argue that now? So on and so forth. And so it's not unusual to have these Copernican shifts in our thinking about ourselves and our understanding about ourselves. But I guess my sense from treating mental health problems, from working with mental health problems, is I really identify with what you're saying about don't wait to have a life. Don't wait to get well to have a life. The way to become well is to have a life. Having a life is a definition of wellness.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no better painkiller than getting into good and great states, because you're doing something that brings some joy. You're connecting again with loved ones, or something you want to do, or you're learning or growing and doing well in different niches. That doesn't mean that you don't have pain in some situations. You can experience pain and joy at the same time. Ultimately, we do want people to get as better as they can, but we can't say what that'll look like, because no one knows the future. And I do get frustrated under certain situations where, when not with the people that tell me, obviously, because they're just giving their narrative as such, but when they've been told, oh, this is how it's going to be, with this real certainty, I find that really difficult to, I have to, bite my lip a little bit, because that person has just been told by someone else, by a therapist or clinician, who may be well-meaning, but has kind of given them this destiny. And if they believe that enough, they will follow that path, thinking, well, that's it.
I agree.
You've just got to manage or cope. I mean, it's complete nonsense. No one has a crystal ball. We need people to be resourceful and to feel that there's hope, because there is hope. And something like impermanence, which is a Buddhist tenet that well, that's something that I think people can really hold on to. And we often have that discussion early on. Each moment is different. Even though things may not feel the same, and that's largely because we might have a narrative where we're telling ourselves and other people it's the same, it's the same, it's the same. Nothing is ever the same. It can't be. Life wouldn't even exist if every moment was the same. We'd be frozen. So that gives great hope.
Yeah.
So then, which direction do you want to go in? Okay, you want to achieve that. Well, let's look at how to do that. We don't need to think about putting you on a bed and pressing you and massaging. I mean, there can be a role sometimes for passive treatments, but minimal, because they don't transform anything. And what people really want is to be living a better life. That's about transformation and learning. That doesn't happen by lying on a couch with someone doing something to you.
Can we go into this conversation about COVID? Do you mind? Because we started it before the show started, and I'm intrigued by it. Intrigued, that's a bad word for it. so clinical. You and I, when we get together, we have these conversations. I get really interested. Actually, people are suffering, and I sort of really recognize that. But there was the psychological sciences have a lot of deserved bad press around chronic fatigue syndrome, for example. And recently, within the last couple of years, NICE changed the guidelines on the treatment of chronic fatigue syndrome to remove CBT as a first-line response, and quite rightly so. That it is not in your head, sort of. It's not a psychological. There is a blood-brain barrier issue. There's a physiological issue that happens. There are real things that happen that you can't take away. That isn't to say that psychology doesn't have a place in that, but there is some stuff that's going on, and you're in that interface as well, right? You're in that interface of where there's biological things happening, but there's also existential things happening for people, and there's emotional things happening, and there's psychological things happening, there's relational things happening, there's life things happening. And I guess what I'm hearing you say is that all of that stuff needs to be brought into the treatment.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. We're talking about someone's lived experience, which incorporates all of those things. It's all crunched together, isn't it? And there's been a lot of controversy over the way that chronic fatigue has been managed. With the whole graded exercise, week 1 do this, week 2 do that. Da, da, da.
Yeah.
I mean, I've never agreed with that anyway. For chronic pain either, because how do you know what week 3 is going to be like? I mean, it's crazy. Again, it's the whole crystal ball thing. We have to meet the person where they are, and what happens more often is the person is pushed and pulled to meet the clinician where they are. Some sort of therapy, right? We're going.
I've just got
or through this hole.
Sorry, you froze for a second at my end there. Can you say that again? So they're forced to meet therapists where they are, and I guess you're saying the patient is forced through a particular hole or something. Yeah.
Yeah, sort of, squeezed down a particular channel, or round peg through a square hole, rather than meeting the person where they are each time you encounter them. So, when you might work with someone for a period of time, typically, you're meeting them at a different time point. Their needs will be different, but you won't know that if you're just saying, right, we're doing this therapy, right, this is week 3 of CBT or week 4 of this or that. I mean, to me, it makes no sense to do that. You're on 2 different paths.
Yeah.
You might be waving to them, hello over there, I'm over here, but the only way any kind of therapy works is if you're together,
Yeah.
led by what they need and want.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to say that there is some fluctuation in the signal. There's not a lot we can do about that. It's just part of the show this evening, and part of modern life post-pandemic. And we have to be talking about the pandemic. Have you seen, though, in your practice with COVID and long COVID and increased inflammation-based responses? And we'll talk a little about inflammation in a second, I think, because I think it's a really interesting topic. Have you seen an increase? Have you noticed personally an increase in chronic pain issues and chronic issues of this nature?
I think the figures are not getting better. You brought up the long COVID, rightly so, because. And I wouldn't necessarily, I'm not sort of comparing people as such, but the issues are similar. And there has been a shift, and a documented shift in approaches towards chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia since, medics have been experiencing long COVID.
Yeah.
And because it's taken a long time for there to be any sort of hardcore science to show any kind of neuroimmune activity. There's been some recent stuff showing changes in muscle structure in people with chronic fatigue. But people have had to, these people who are suffering have had to fight on top of that to get believed. To me, that makes no sense at all. Why we're here to provide health care, to sort of not believe people because your limited model doesn't show something. Is just arrogance of the highest degree. I think it is changing, but it's very slow. I mean, I still see far more people who have pretty bad stories about not being believed, not taken seriously, told that the only route forward is medication and interventions.
Yeah.
And then eventually, when that doesn't work, months or years down the line, maybe go and try some psychology now. I mean, it's such poor way of going about it, because right from the start, they need to know how to look after themselves, how to self-care, how to learn those skills that they need. And then, if appropriate, bring in the medication, and they're the bit part players.
Yeah,
but they're still the bulk. There's, I guess I'm echoing what I said before, but I just feel so strongly because people are suffering unnecessarily.
Yeah. And I think we have to be realistic about that. These types of, and you sometimes describe them as sticky problems as well as chronic problems, which I think is a really nice way of describing them. Things that stick around for a long time. And like literally just before this, I was doing a family session where in that family, somebody has a sticky problem. It's called psychosis. It's sticking around for a long time, right? It really is. And learning how to be healthy and well within that has nothing to do with being cured of psychosis, because that's not available. It's just not. You know,
Yeah.
it can be quiescent at times. It can be sometimes flare up, and sometimes, and you have to manage all of that. You have to have a life that allows for all of those types of experiences and embraces the lived reality of being somebody with that condition. And it seems to me that you're talking in similar types of terms, or terms that I understand in that way. I don't want to take over your terminology or sort of say you're saying what I'm saying, but it seems to me it's something similar to that when we notice these things in people, our first step is to go, okay, right, well, let's look at how you're doing life on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
Rather than I'm the expert, so I'm going to fix you. And it's sort of more about shifting that type of dynamic into, well, listen, folks, this is going to hang around for a while. You're going to need a set of skills around how you meet yourself and get real with who you are. And how you might have. And I was, again, somebody reached out to me not long ago about their sister, because their sister has a diagnosis of bipolar, which is a very serious issue. And again, I started the conversation by, well, what are they doing every day in their life that's fun?
Yeah.
What are you doing every day in your life that gives you joy, that gives you pleasure? And not a lot, just obsessing about whether the level of medication was right. Should I be on lithium? Should I be on this? Should I be on an atypical antipsychotic? I mean, it's like, okay, all you need to do is get to a point where you can be stable enough, in my opinion, to be able to look at whether you can go to the cinema. Is there a film that you want to watch? Can you go and meet your mates and all that sort of stuff? And those are the types of questions, it seemed to me, that are really important to ask. And again, coming back to that thing about, a treatment of mental health issues, you're talking about chronic pain, but I will talk about mental health issues. Treatment of mental health issues is not about the absence of illness. It's about the presence of wellness. And trying to find the presence of wellness. And what does wellness look like? Well, wellness can't possibly mean that I don't have distress or illness, because we would never be well, could it?
No, you can't have one without the other. I love the old, again, the Buddhist tenet. I mean, I do lean on Buddhism. I'm not a Buddhist per se, but 10,000 joys, 10,000 sorrows. We're going to have it all. You can't have one without the other. Everyone's got stuff. And we're trying to live in the best way we can, as healthily as we can, and to contribute to whatever is going on around us and to the world in some way, and have some sort of purpose, and be connected with those things.
And be the best version of ourselves that we can be at any one particular moment, I guess. So using that sort of recovery model. Thinking about this, and because I've known you a long time, and I've known you in this field, and I've watched it grow and develop, and I find it very exciting and interesting what you do, which is why I work with you and why I wanted to bring you on. But you were then inspired to do something I think is bonkers, which is write a book. No idea why. You must have moments of complete ridiculous sort of something. What on earth inspired you to go down and write a book, you nutter?
I know. It's funny because if I don't know if any of my teachers from when I was much younger, if they're still with us, but they would be like, "You're the last person who would do that," Actually, they'd probably say you'd be the last person.
Folks, you should know it's difficult to get notes out of him, let alone a book. I mean, seriously.
But I love writing, and I write in all formats. Really, I do blogs and that sort of thing, and then I've done book chapters before. I write actually, a lot of people don't know I write a lot of poetry, and I've got some quite interesting things around that coming next. But I've wanted to write a book for a long time, and I fiddled around for ages. And then I went on a running, as you know, I used to love ultra running, and I went on a running writing retreat, which is basically a weekend away with a couple of great guys who are writers and runners. And that was, I think, in 2018, and that's when I really thought, no, come on, let's do it. Although most of the writing for the book that's just come out has been over the last couple of years, that's when it started. And then I got approached by a publisher, and it got serious. Well, slightly serious, I suppose. And again, I was just fiddling around. I thought, right, I need to go and sit in a hut. And I went and sat in a hut, and I got loads of stuff done, and that was great. And I realized that's probably, if I really want to get bulk work done, and I get very easily distracted by things around me, guitars and music and anything. So going and sitting in places, and a friend of mine has a beautiful house up in North Wales overlooking Snowdon, and he kindly lets me go up there and sit up there and with that backdrop and write. So so I got it done, and I think I've got a few others lined up. You'll be glad to hear.
Great. So tell us about this book. What's it called, first of all?
Well, it's called Understand and Overcome Your Chronic Pain, comprehensive guide.
Right.
And it really is what it says on the tin. It's been very much based on my work. And I've been, as you know, I've been in healthcare my whole professional career, 30 years or something. So it's really based on that.
Just so people should understand this, because maybe people don't understand this, but physios are very highly qualified, very experienced people who are regulated. It's HCPC regulation still.
Yeah.
And they are really tough, and you're still regulated, I guess, as a professional.
Yeah.
So Richmond is accountable for his practice legally. And part of the same I'm part of the same regulatory body for my sins. There you go. And we're part of an overall sort of regulatory authority, which is an act of parliament that was set up in 23, I think, or 2022, which regulates doctors, nurses, physios, me, not me individually, but my profession, which is drum therapy and psychiatrists and etc. We're all part of that regulatory body. So when Richmond's talking, people should know this. I think it's very important. He's talking within that type of framework that everything he's talking about, he's accountable for legally. He's not just making stuff off the top of his head, right? So people should understand that.
Yeah, no, it's a fair point. I guess, but my background is multidisciplinary, and I that's arguably why I ended up. I mean, I've been involved with chronic pain for many years, but I trained as a nurse originally, as you probably remember, and ended up doing four different degrees in various things, rehabilitation, obviously the physio, the pain science, that was a master's, and various psychological trainings, if you want to call it that, and motivation interviewing, compassion focused therapy, bits and bobs, CBT stuff. So and coaching, and so for I think it's the last 20 years I've been sort of developing this idea of pain coaching, so bringing strengths-based coaching alongside what we were doing as a way of being with people. It fits really well with the MI, actually. And
there's a lot of people learning strengths-based coaching these days. I mean, various clinical psychologists I know are doing that because of the outcomes are fantastic. And taking a strengths-based approach is a really, really helpful way of thinking about it. But let's come back to the book. I just wanted to have that segue into this is not some guy, sort of random stranger off the street. It's a serious professional.
Just sort of banged out some book on pain. I mean, there are books coming out on pain, I can't comment on those. I know of one or two, and they're quite general. Whereas the purpose of this book is to be giving someone that knowledge, skills, and know-how. I can't be with everyone because there's just me, and so I'm looking at different ways that I can reach. There's millions of people suffering across the globe. How can I reach? And this is one way. I've got other ways that I want to build on, but this is one way of reaching people so they can access the thinking and put it into practice.
So the book is a practical helping thing. Is that the aim of it? Tell us about what people would get from it when they buy it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So it's jam-packed with insights and practices and tools. I mean, the practices and tools section is extensive. And people might be surprised with some of the stuff, that they see in there. I mean, we've been talking about, if they've been listening to us chatting, they're probably less surprised because they'll get the approach. But it starts really by helping them understand their pain. So I go through, the PP model in language that I hope, and from the feedback I've got from people who I got to read it, because I wanted to make sure that it didn't sound, academic and whatnot. This is for real practical use. And whilst it will inevitably raise questions, it'll be challenging for some people. They might read it and go, "Oh, no, that's not me." The sticky beliefs around what you're experiencing are part of why you're still experiencing pain. Again, not a blame thing. This is just what happens as humans, as it seems. But I talk about that in the book as well. I say, look, you might be challenged by this, but this is part of the deal. This is part of your system's generating this experience for you.
Yeah.
These are some ways that you can go with that. One reader sort of described it as feeling like I was there. People have said it's like like you're with me, like having your arm around me, walking with,
right.
So, and that's really what I wanted. I wanted it to be that. I wanted it to be warm and to feel, a lot of people reading it won't know me, but maybe they can listen to this and hopefully get a sense that this is my purpose, is to help people to ease their suffering and to live their best lives. And I believe they can. With the right kind of guidance.
And where can people get hold of it, Richmond, if they want to buy it?
It's on Amazon.
Yeah.
And you can get it from Sequoia, the publisher. They're the two places. It's only just come out, so hopefully it'll start turning up in bookshops and things. But for now, definitely on Amazon and Sequoia, the publisher.
And when the show goes out, folks, if you're watching the show, this is a pre-record, so you'll see it on some Wednesday evening, not quite sure when, but we'll make sure there's a link to the Amazon purchase if you want it, and to the publishers as well, so that people can get hold of it. I want to reiterate to folks that, if you're experiencing chronic pain, I would encourage you to buy this, and I would encourage you to sort of listen very seriously to what Richmond has to offer. I've seen the very dark side of chronic pain, and just working in psychological therapies. It sort of long-term sticky conditions can lead to a very dark hole if you allow yourself to get into that hole with them. And unfortunately, there is a lot of practice that encourages an over obsession with the condition, as opposed to really where I think our obsession needs to be, which is on having a good life. And my experience is that people can have a good life under all sorts of conditions. And I don't want people to put extreme comments about wars and bombings and stuff like that. And yes, that's awful. Objective realities, we're not talking about that. What we're talking about is the more mundane stuff, where people are quietly suffering into an earlier grave. That's what we're talking about helping those people, because they can be helped, and you can be helped. That's the truth. You can be helped. What can't be done is you can't be cured of life, I'm afraid. It's like that's not on the tables.
It just turns up for you, doesn't it? It's amazing in a way when you sort of realize that there's nothing I have to do for my heart to beat, or for this just to appear, for you to hear my voice, that kind of stuff. It's that's the miracle of life. I know that can sound trite, so maybe someone's listening and they're really struggling. So it's all right for you. I get that, but that doesn't mean that there's a lot of things that you can't do to be helped, to help yourself. And it's understanding it's a proactive thing. We can walk alongside you, we can guide, we can encourage, but this is your work. And it's it is tough and it's up and down, but you can do it, and we see lots of people doing it
without Stace. So I think there's something about humility for helping professions and helping professionals to have some humility about what we can and can't do, and transfer that to our patients in terms of saying, well, there may be elements of your experience that there's not a lot we can do about it, but you can change your relationship to that experience.
Yeah, that's a massive deal, because whatever's happening right now, and again, this is one of the insights I talk to people I work with about, whatever's happening now, it's already happening. There's nothing you can do about that.
Yeah.
But how you relate to it, that's the key, because that determines where you go. And then we can arm you with all these different kinds of ways of responding, which soothe or take you down this path, or essentially create the conditions. And that's really what we're doing, is we're helping people to create better conditions so that their life improves. And often I'd probably say one thing around the book is that it may be useful. I mean, certainly it's not a medical treatment, the book on its own. People will probably use it with people that they're working with. It's also a book for clinicians to read, actually, because a lot of clinicians don't have a great understanding of pain because it's not in the curriculum. But yet we face and work with enormous numbers of people. You're not going to work in healthcare without working with people with chronic conditions. But the training on those and how to be, how are you with those people? That it's so small unless you're really into it and you go off and you get that extra training in MI and these kinds of things. It's very scant what you get. So it's not clinicians' fault. They're just not trained for it because, again, it's just not there yet in the detail that I would say is required, bearing in mind the numbers of people that are out there that really need us, and we can be so helpful.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, we haven't really talked about inflammation, the role of inflammation, but I would just point out to people that, there was an old theory about depression was inflammation in the brain, and subsequent research recently has shown that is true. And that, inflammation is a really important subject. And it's one of those aspects of our functioning, which is very much influenced by how we live our life.
Yeah, oh, definitely.
And it also has an influence on how we live our life. And so there's a sort of feedback mechanism going on. And I guess that's what you're talking about here, is that this slow, gradual movement into health and well-being, despite the fact that we're frail human beings and we carry our baggage, right?
Yeah. Well, we can. Yeah. I mean, we do. We don't have to, but we do. But yeah, inflammation is a big deal. I mean, when I was doing my master's in pain science, we were talking in the early 2000s, we were talking about stuff that then 15 years later, people are talking about as if it's just come out. Like, no, we've known this for a long time.
Yeah.
And so, some of the big players in that, chronic stress, loneliness or perceived loneliness, is switching things at a gene level. I mean, there's fascinating work that was done, well over 10 years ago, looking at that. The perception of being lonely was enough to switch the genes into being pro-inflammatory, because but it kind of makes sense.
You're literally killing yourself by doing that, literally.
Yeah. But the thing is that if you perceive yourself to be lonely, you need that inflammatory mechanism to be working well, because if you get bitten by the lion, we haven't got the tribe to protect you, so you need your mechanisms to be working for you. Healing is kick-started by inflammation. It's really important. We go through natural cycles each day, which play a big role in people's day-to-day experience. When you wake up in the morning feeling stiff and groggy, a lot of the biology around that is inflammation. So what can you do? Well, you can get a morning routine which involves some movement and some breathing to change your state, to change your biology. Get into that. Yeah, you can do it. So these natural cycles you can work with, or maybe we could say surf. You're surfing the waves. There's the bigger waves in the morning for a lot of people because it's pretty tough getting out of bed, particularly if they've had a bad night's sleep. So let's look at how you can surf those waves better, so that you get the day going better. That
Fortunately,
kind of
we've
simple
run out
stuff.
of time. I'm going to have to stop us. We could keep going. I just throw these words at you and then go. If people want to get hold of you specifically, have you got a place they can go, website or something like that?
Yeah, so richmondstace.com. I'm active on Instagram at Pain Coach, Twitter at Pain Physio, slightly less so, and I've got a newsletter on Substack. But if you go to my website, you can subscribe to that, and I pump out my ideas and writings there as well, so people can check it all out.
And I guess, and I'm just going to finish on this observation. I guess what people can observe about you is your sort of generally creative approach to things, and the way you are, I think, is important to look at. And sort of certainly, I'm a great believer in the power of creativity.
Yeah.
approaching life as a palette, as a
Definitely.
creative palette in which we want to experiment and grow and develop. Whatever's going on, if we can take that sort of approach, I think we're going to find that things are better for us.
Definitely.
And it's always really interesting having conversation with you. And again, it's encouraging people to have a conversation with themselves like this. Be open to this conversation is, I guess, the message, right? Be open to the conversation, to something new, to new possibilities. Don't listen to things like the memory stack are really useful. This is a neurological thing. Things like patterning are really useful if you want to drive a car, or if you want to boil an egg. It's not that helpful if you want to sort of have a really good quality of life when you're being dragged down by chronic pain. You don't want to be looking at the old, you want to be looking at the new. Then stay focused on that, really. Richmond, wonderful to have you on.
Thank you.
Always. Good luck with the book. I hope it will sell well, and simply because it'll help a lot of people.
Thank you. No, it's great to chat. Always love chatting, Noel.
So lovely to have you. Stay there while I turn the recording off. I'll see you all again with the next guest, and I have no hope of remembering who the next guest at all, but I hope you enjoy the show. Bye-bye.